She wasn't a killer, but on a blood-stained journey through the high desert, her life had been traded for a secret capable of shattering the fragile peace of an entire land. No one believed her, except one man, a loner, the only soul standing between her and the edge of annihilation. The afternoon air lay still over the withered plains. Elias Turner swung his old hammer against a crooked fence post, each strike dull, steady, mechanical. Dust curled in the wind, catching the sun's dying light as it drifted past the warped windows of a sagging cabin, the same cabin where Martha once laughed and a boy once played. Now it was silent, a grave made of wood. The place hadn't changed, but Elias had. Since the accident, his heart had hardened into something cold and unreachable. A man who didn't ask questions. A man who no longer listened for answers. He walked the ridge to check on his cattle, the horizon burning crimson behind the hills. Beside him padded Rex, his loyal mutt, nose twitching. Then, without warning, the dog froze. A low, guttural growl rumbled from his throat, head snapping toward a thick tangle of sagebrush. Elias squinted. Just beyond the thorns, crumpled like discarded fabric, lay a figure, a girl. She couldn't have been older than 17. Her skin was sun-darkened, hair matted with blood. A patchwork of cuts and bruises covered her arms, and her left shoulder was soaked in red, fresh and deep. Her eyes fluttered, wide, terrified, unfocused, but alive, just barely. She wasn't screaming, she didn't have the strength. Her breath was a whisper, her body limp. A single movement could have snuffed out what little was left of her flame. Elias stood frozen. Something old and buried clawed at his chest. Fear? No. Memory. A young woman once screamed his name after being thrown from a horse. A child once cried out for his father during a fevered night, but both were long gone. Still, here he was again, standing over someone the world had already written off. Apache, maybe. Hunted. Alone. He dropped to one knee, pressing his hand to the wound at her shoulder. Warmth. Life. She wasn't dead yet. "You might be a killer," he murmured, not even sure who he was talking to anymore, "but I ain't leaving you to die." With a grunt, he lifted her gently into his arms. She didn't resist, couldn't. Her head lolled against his chest, and Elias could feel the shallow rise and fall of her breath. He looked toward his cabin, the last shelter he owned, and began walking into the setting sun. But before they reached the porch, Rex growled again, louder this time, tail stiff, ears locked forward. Then came the sound. Hooves, dozens of them, pounding the earth, getting closer. The night didn't offer cover, it exposed everything. There were no trees, no rocks, just Elias, the girl, and a wide-open stretch of land being swallowed by darkness. These weren't the kind of men who knocked. They were the kind who hunted, the kind who didn't stop to ask. Who was chasing her, and what did they think she'd seen? Elias looked down at the girl in his arms. Her eyelids twitched, like a fevered dream was dragging her back under. His gut twisted, not in fear, in knowing that this wasn't just trouble. It was the kind of storm that could tear through everything a man still cared about. He didn't run. He didn't speak. He turned, pushed the door open with his shoulder, and brought her inside. The wooden door groaned under Elias's shoulder. The last time anyone had crossed that threshold, it had been in mourning. Now he carried something far more fragile than grief, a girl barely clinging to breath. He laid her gently on the narrow bed in the corner, the one that had once belonged to Martha. The blankets smelled of cedar and dust. Elias crouched beside her, unrolling the worn canvas pouch of supplies he hadn't touched in years, not since the accident. The wound on her shoulder was jagged, angry. Dried blood had crusted down her arm and across her chest. He poured boiled water into a tin bowl and reached for a clean cloth, his fingers working with practiced stillness. The girl didn't flinch, didn't stir. Her breathing was shallow. He worked in silence, his face tight, brow furrowed, not in fear, but focus. When he reached for her knife, still sheathed and tucked tight against her waist, his hand paused. It was instinct, not fear of her, but respect. Slowly, deliberately, he unbuckled the leather strap and set the weapon aside. Not to disarm her, but to let her wake up unthreatened. A gesture of trust, spoken in silence. She was light as a shadow, her ribs barely rising beneath the threadbare linen. Elias covered her with a thick wool blanket and sat back, his hands resting on his knees, eyes fixed on the girl's face. For a long moment, he didn't move. The fire cracked once behind him, and something in the air shifted. A scent, a memory. Camphor, iron. That same sharp tang he'd known on a winter night 6 years ago, when he held his boy's fevered body in that very bed. His hands had once bathed a child with water warmed over the same stove. He'd pressed damp cloths to a burning forehead, whispered lullabies into the dark, while outside the wind howled like a thing in pain. Now, here he was again. Different child, different pain. Same silence, same fire. A flicker of motion. The girl stirred. Her lips parted, but only a whisper came out, garbled, like a word spoken in a dream. Elias leaned closer, but she had already drifted again, eyes fluttering beneath closed lids. Then came another sound, not from her lips, but from outside. A sharp snap, a hoof on dry brush. Elias froze. He crossed the room in 2 strides and pulled back the curtain just an inch. Nothing but darkness beyond the trees. But the unease was already curling in his stomach like smoke. When he turned back, the girl was mumbling in Apache. The words came in short, frantic bursts, chased by tremors that ran through her thin frame. Then a name, almost too soft to hear. Yiska. Elias didn't know what it meant, but her voice broke on the word. Whatever it was, it hurt. He sat down on the edge of the bed. For the first time, her eyes opened, cloudy, unfocused. She blinked, lips trembling. "Don't let them find me," she said, barely louder than the wind. "I won't," Elias replied, even though she may not have heard. The dog, Rex, lifted his head and let out a low, warning growl. Elias crossed the room again, this time to the gun rack. He took down the Winchester, cold steel familiar in his grip. He didn't load it yet, didn't need to, not until he knew what was coming. But something was coming. He could feel it. He turned back to the girl, her face pale under the dim light. Something about her still didn't add up. Not just the wound, not just the fear. It was the brand burned into her satchel, a mark, a symbol. Not Apache, not Army. Something older. He frowned. Satchel. She hadn't been carrying much, just the knife and the bag. And inside the bag, he opened it. A single strip of parchment, rolled tight and sealed with wax, though the seal had broken. Not words, not a map, not even English. Symbols. He didn't understand them, but one thing was certain. This girl hadn't just witnessed something. She was carrying something. Something worth killing for. He stood at the window and listened. The night was breathing, and not kindly. Who was chasing her, and what did they think she'd seen? Curious to see how this unfolds? Hit that subscribe button to catch more. Before we dive into everything, let us know in the comments, where are you watching this video from? Connecting with viewers from all across the world has been a huge source of inspiration for us. Elias placed the girl gently on the bed, Martha's old bed. The bedsheets still carried the faint scent of lavender and sun-bleached cotton, long unused but carefully kept. Ayana didn't stir. Her skin was pale beneath its warm hue, streaked with dirt and blood. Elias crouched beside her, unbuckling the leather satchel at his waist. Inside was a rusted tin box, his old medical kit. It hadn't seen daylight since the last time he tried and failed to save someone he loved. He washed her shoulder with water from the kettle and pressed a clean cloth to the wound. The bullet had grazed her, not deep but messy. With steady hands, he cleaned and bandaged the gash. Ayanna groaned, a weak, guttural sound that spoke more of fear than pain. Elias didn't speak. He just did what needed doing. Afterward, he set a bowl of broth near the bed and returned to the porch, his eyes scanning the distant hills. The sun had dropped below the ridge. In its wake came a chilling silence and the first prickles of unease. Rex lay near the door, ears twitching, nose in the wind. Something out there wasn't right. Inside, Ayanna stirred. Her lips moved, whispering in Apache. Elias didn't understand the words, but he knew fear when he saw it. She reached weakly for the blade he'd set aside. Her eyes were wild with survival. "No one's gonna hurt you," Elias murmured, moving the knife out of reach but not out of sight. "Not while you're under my roof." The girl's hand fell limp. As night settled over the prairie, Elias blocked the windows and doused the lantern. No light, no sound. The kind of quiet that screams of being watched. Then came the first sign. A faint flicker of movement along the northern tree line. Elias squinted. Riders. 4 of them. No torches, no calls, just dark figures watching, waiting, measuring. He stepped back from the window, his jaw clenched. They know she's here. The porch creaked under his boots as he stepped outside. He made a wide arc around the barn, rifle slung low, eyes fixed on the horizon. The figures had vanished, but the air smelled different. Burned leather, iron, and something darker. He wasn't just sheltering a stranger. He was harboring a girl branded a killer. And now danger had followed her straight into the heart of his past. By morning, Ayanna could sit up. Her voice, hoarse and broken, struggled through English words. "They say I killed them, but I didn't. I saw, that's all." Elias leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, unreadable. "Who?" She hesitated, then whispered. "White family, ranch outside Canyon Bend. Someone murdered them, blamed me." Her eyes welled with tears, but she blinked them away. "They want me dead so I can't talk." Rex growled low. Elias followed the dog's gaze to a smudge of dust rising in the east. Another rider. Just one, for now. Elias grabbed his rifle and turned to the girl. "You got enemies coming, and I ain't stupid enough to ask why. But I'll tell you this, if they think they can burn their way through this land again like it's theirs to own, they're gonna meet fire of a different kind." He moved to the barn, saddled up his old Mustang, Dusty, and rode out half a mile to scout the rise. There, crouched behind a limestone boulder, he watched. A wagon, 2 horses, 5 men. One with a spyglass, scanning the land like he already knew where to look. Elias returned home before they saw him. He opened a hidden compartment under the floorboards and pulled out 2 things he hadn't touched in years. A faded blue uniform jacket and a medal. He tossed both into the fire. "I already fought one war," he muttered. "Didn't plan on fighting another. But some battles come to you, whether you want 'em or not. And some girls, no matter how much blood you find on 'em, don't deserve to die alone in the dirt." The storm didn't wait until morning. By the time Elias had finished wrapping her shoulder in fresh linen and setting her by the fire, the first rumble of distant thunder rolled low across the valley. Not from the sky, but from the earth. Hooves, many of them. Still far off, but moving with purpose. He stepped onto the porch, eyes narrowed against the wind, and scanned the dusky horizon. Nothing yet.
But Rex was already growling, tail stiff, ears locked in the direction of the low ridge trail. Whatever was coming, it wasn't welcome. Back inside, Ayanna stirred. Her eyes fluttered open for just a second, glazed with fever and confusion. "Don't let them take it," she whispered, the words barely audible through cracked lips. Elias leaned closer, but she'd already drifted back into sleep, clutching the blanket like it was her last defense against the world. He turned to the door and slid the bolt shut. In the dim light, the cabin seemed even smaller than usual. The walls, once built to keep out wolves and snow, now felt more like paper, too thin to keep out the kind of men he knew would be coming. Bounty hunters didn't knock, and men chasing Apache girls didn't ask questions. He grabbed his rifle from the mantel and checked the chamber. Still loaded. He hadn't fired it in over a year, not since the coyote raid on the chicken coop. But the steel was oiled and the stock worn smooth from use. It would do. The storm moved closer. Dust stirred along the fence line. Elias paced the room, calculating. They'd start with questions, pretend to be lawmen, maybe wave some kind of badge they bought for a few dollars in Carson. But if they thought she was here, if they knew, they wouldn't waste time. He'd seen their kind before. Men who hunted people like coyotes, driven by money and something darker. One wrong move, and this place would become a battlefield. He crouched by the bed and whispered, "You listen if you can hear me. If they come, don't make a sound. Don't run. You'll just give 'em a reason." She didn't answer. Just a weak breath, then another. He pulled the rug aside and opened the trap door beneath the stove. The old root cellar was dark and damp, with walls lined in stone and cobwebs, but it was hidden and deep enough to muffle sound. He grabbed a lantern and checked the hatch from below. It's still locked from the inside. That would have to be enough. Elias returned and, as gently as he could, lifted Ayanna from the bed. She was light, too light. Every bone felt like it might break. Her skin was warm, clammy with sweat, and her breath trembled against his neck as he carried her down into the cellar and laid her on an old cot covered in wool blankets. Before shutting the door, he handed her the small skinning knife he kept on his belt. "I hope you don't need this," he muttered, "but if you do, make it count." Then he closed the hatch and covered it with the rug, just as the first set of hooves entered the front yard. Rex barked, furious now, claws scratching against the floorboards. Elias moved to the door slowly, rifle in hand, and opened it just a crack. 3 riders. All 3 wore dusters long enough to hide shotguns. The lead man had a wide-brimmed hat low over his face and eyes like cold ash. A scar ran from his chin to the edge of his lip. Elias knew the type. Mercenary. Former tracker, maybe. Or worse, ex-cavalry turned outlaw. "Evening," the scarred man called, voice dry as gravel. "You Elias Turner?" Elias nodded once. "Name's Ezra Crow. I'm looking for a fugitive, young Apache girl. Hurt. Might have come through these parts. You seen anything unusual lately?" Elias didn't flinch. "Just coyotes, storms, nothing unusual about that." Crow smiled. It wasn't friendly. "Funny thing, your neighbor said he saw movement up by the ridge last night. Said someone stumbled down toward your land." Elias shrugged. "Probably just a deer. They spook easy." Ezra dismounted. The other 2 followed suit, hands never straying far from their holsters. "Mind if we look around?" Elias stepped fully onto the porch. The wind picked up, and for the first time in years, he felt the familiar rush of danger buzz in his blood. His voice came low, even. "You set 1 foot past this porch without a warrant, I'll consider it trespass." Ezra's eyes narrowed. "You really want to make this difficult?" Elias didn't answer. He didn't have to. The doorframe creaked behind him as Rex snarled from within, and the shotgun inside his cabin gleamed just enough to catch the last light of sunset.
The standoff stretched, silent and tight. Finally, Ezra tipped his hat. "Have it your way, for now." The three men mounted their horses and rode off, but Elias didn't relax. He stood on the porch long after the dust settled, watching the road, knowing full well they'd be back, and next time they wouldn't be asking. Elias didn't sleep that night. He sat by the fire with his rifle across his lap, and Rex curled tight at his feet, eyes half-lidded but ears alert. Outside, the wind picked up in fits and starts, rattling the shutters like an impatient knock. But no one came. Not yet. At dawn, he opened the trapdoor and climbed down into the root cellar. Ayanna was awake. Her dark eyes blinked at him from the cot, pupils adjusting to the lamplight. Sweat had dried on her brow, and the fever looked to be breaking, but her expression was still wary, coiled like a fox that's been too long in a snare. He crouched beside her and offered a tin cup of water. She stared at it, then him, before finally taking a cautious sip. "They came," he said, "men on horses, bounty types, looking for you." Ayanna didn't answer. "You said something last night about not letting them take it. What were you talking about?" A beat passed. She looked down at the knife he'd left in her hands. Then, slowly, she set it aside and leaned back into the cot, lips dry and cracked. "They think I stole something," she said hoarsely, "but I didn't. What is it they're after?" Ayanna hesitated, her voice barely above a whisper. "Not gold, not silver. Words. Words that were supposed to stay buried. A treaty. My uncle, he died protecting it. They say I killed him."
"I didn't." Elias leaned back, the pieces beginning to arrange themselves in his mind like fence posts in hard ground. "And now they think you're running with it?" She nodded. "I buried it, out near the Devil's Spine. Too many people died for that piece of paper. I wasn't going to let it get used for more." Elias stood. "Then we'd best make sure they don't get you either." That day passed slowly. Every hour stretched thin by anticipation. Elias spent it reinforcing the windows, hauling crates and feed sacks to make barricades behind the doors. He cut brush and stacked it near the fence, then soaked it with kerosene. If they came back, he'd light the whole damn ridge. Better to blind them than be overrun. Ayanna remained mostly in the cellar, her strength returning bit by bit. When the sun hit a certain angle, she asked for air, and he helped her sit just by the trapdoor. She didn't speak much, but when she did, her voice carried the weight of something far older than her years. "They'll kill anyone who gets in their way," she said. "You didn't have to help me." "No," Elias replied, setting a fresh log on the fire. "But I did." She looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. Not with gratitude exactly, but with understanding. That night, as dusk bled into a blue-black sky, the air turned heavy again, the silence before a second storm. This time, it wasn't hooves he heard first, but the creak of a gate. Deliberate, slow. Elias extinguished the lanterns and moved to the window, crouched low. Through the narrow slats of the shutter, he saw them. 5 riders, dismounted now, creeping across his land like wolves circling a wounded elk. One of them lit a torch. Ezra Crow was back. Elias's pulse drummed in his ears. He could see the outline of a rifle slung across one man's back, a machete on another's belt. This wasn't a search. It was a raid. He slipped to the back of the cabin and opened the trapdoor. "They're here," he whispered. "You stay quiet. You hear shots. You don't come up." Ayanna didn't argue this time. Rex bristled beside him, hackles raised. Elias took a deep breath and moved to the door. He cracked it open just enough to step outside into the twilight. The torchlight danced like fireflies on the edges of his property. Ezra stood with his boot on the fence rail, watching. "You had your chance," he called.
"I told you, she's not here," Elias replied, rifle steady. Ezra shrugged. "Then you won't mind if we look harder." The tension snapped like a wire. Elias raised the rifle and fired, not at a man, but at the torch. The flame exploded into the night, sending the men ducking behind cover. That was all the time he needed. He vanished back into the cabin, barred the door, and took position at the corner window. The first shot shattered the porch post. They were done talking. The siege had begun. The siege stretched into the night like a fever dream. Gunfire came in short bursts, aimed to rattle more than kill. Each shot slammed into the outer walls, splitting timber and kicking up clouds of dust and splinters. Inside the cabin, Elias worked in silence, patching, bracing, moving. Every corner was a line of defense. Every breath was another minute survived. He turned over the table and crouched behind it, rifle at the ready, listening to the soft groans of the house as it absorbed the assault. Ayanna stayed in the cellar below, but he could hear her movements too, quiet, precise, not panicked, preparing. In a lull between volleys, Elias cracked the window shutter just enough to catch a glimpse. Ezra Crow was still there, leaning against the nearest horse, drinking from a flask like it was a picnic. The other men had spread out behind hay bales and troughs, using the slope of the land to pin Elias from every direction. They weren't in a hurry. They were waiting for him to break. "Elias," came a voice from the dark, low and smooth like oiled steel. "You're a decent shot, I'll give you that. But you're outgunned, you know that. And time, well, time's no friend of yours." Elias didn't answer. He loaded another shell into the chamber and adjusted his position. Ayanna's voice drifted up from the trapdoor, calm but urgent. "They'll burn you out if they have to." "They'll try." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "Let me out." He turned. "No. You can't do this alone. I can and I will. You'll die. Better me than you." Ayanna stared at him, that flint-hard look in her eyes again, the same one he'd seen in the field when she'd barely been conscious, blood drying down her arm and eyes filled with fire. "You're not the only one who's lost something," she said quietly. "If I die here, fine, but I won't die hiding." Before he could answer, a glass bottle sailed through the air and shattered against the porch beam. Flames erupted in a flash, lighting up the front wall like a lantern. Someone had thrown a damn firebomb. "Move!" Elias shouted. He grabbed a bucket from the rain barrel inside, flung it across the flames, smothering them in sizzling steam. But another bottle was already flying through the air, this time toward the back of the house. He didn't have enough buckets for all of it. Smoke began creeping along the ceiling beams. They were trying to flush him out. Then a voice from outside, familiar and sharp. "Bring the girl out and we walk away. That's the deal. Last offer." Elias stared at the door, then at the trapdoor below, the smoke, the fire. His blood pounded in his ears like war drums. He thought of Martha, of his son, of the grave behind the barn where he buried their bones with his own 2 hands. Then he looked at Ayanna, fierce, terrified, defiant. A child, but also something more, a witness, a torchbearer, and the last piece of truth standing between a massacre and justice. He made his choice. He handed her a knife, then opened the cabinet under the stove and pulled out a burlap sack with 2 pistols, both loaded. "Can you shoot?" She nodded. "Good." He moved fast, threw a blanket over the trap door to mask the opening, then kicked open the back door and ran out, firing a warning shot toward the trees. Ezra's men dove for cover, giving Elias the opening he needed. He sprinted to the barn, Rex right behind him, bullets chasing their heels like hornets. Inside, he pulled open the hayloft hatch and shouted, "Now!" Ayanna burst from the cabin, sliding into a dry ditch by the fence, just like he'd told her. Together, they returned fire from opposite sides, catching the attackers in a deadly pincer. Ezra ducked behind a trough, cursing, "You're both gonna die for this!" Elias grinned grimly behind the rifle. "Then come do it yourself." The air was thick with smoke and dust now, the ground shook with hooves, and as dawn crept over the horizon, it cast a strange light on the battlefield. Two figures, side by side, facing the darkness, not as strangers, but as something else entirely. Something like family. And this wasn't over, not yet. The gunfire had stopped for now. The sun, a sickly orange disk, began to rise above the horizon. Smoke lingered in the air like breath held too long. Elias stood in the doorway of the barn, his rifle slung over one shoulder, sweat and soot staining his shirt. His hands trembled, not from fear, but from the weight of knowing the peace was temporary. Inside the loft, Ayanna sat cross-legged on the hay, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. She had refused to sleep. Her eyes, dark and hollowed by exhaustion, were fixed on something far away, something Elias couldn't see. He sat beside her without a word. For a while there was only silence. Then she spoke. "I should have died in that canyon." Elias turned his head. "You didn't." "I was meant to." Her voice was steady now, no longer a child's. "They needed me to vanish, make it look like I ran, like I was guilty." "Of what?" She turned to him, finally meeting his eyes. "Murder." He didn't flinch.
They say I killed a white family, husband, wife, 2 children. Said I led warriors there, burned the house, took a medallion from the woman's neck. And did you? She looked at the floor. No, I was there, but I didn't kill them. I tried to stop it. They were already dead when I arrived. Who did it? Ayanna's jaw tightened. She pulled a bundle from beneath her blanket, something wrapped in oilcloth. She handed it to Elias. He unwrapped it slowly, revealing an old copper-colored amulet engraved with spiral symbols. The metal was etched with Apache glyphs, but also English lettering, faded with time. One word stood out. Treaty. Elias's breath caught. What is this? It's a binding agreement between a tribal chief and a Union general, signed 30 years ago. My grandfather was there. What kind of agreement? Land, she whispered, sacred land, promised to remain untouched. And in exchange, my people would keep peace. But no one ever honored it. Elias stared at the medallion, then at her. Where did you find it? My mother hid it in the ravine. She told me if anything happened to her, to keep it safe. After the attack, I came back for it. That's when they saw me. Ezra? Ayanna nodded. He's not just a bounty hunter. He's working for someone. Someone who wants the land this treaty protects. Elias stood. Let me guess. Railroad? Or silver? Or both? Doesn't matter. If this medallion gets to the right hands, people start asking questions. Questions that could stop everything they've planned. They can't allow that. So they blame me. Elias rubbed a hand over his face. That's why they're after you. Not just because of what they think you did, but because of what you know. She looked down. This land isn't just dirt and rock. It's where my ancestors were buried, where our spirits walk. If that treaty is honored, they'll have to leave it untouched. And if it's destroyed, they erase us. A long silence.
Elias stepped outside the barn, staring at the ridgeline. The men were still there, waiting. He thought of his wife's grave, of the tiny cross he carved by hand, of the vows he made in silence after the dirt was packed down, to never lose another soul under his roof. He thought those promises had died with his son, but maybe they hadn't. He turned back to Ayanna. "You trust me?" She looked up, unsure. He held up the medallion. "Because this thing right here, this isn't just your fight anymore." Her voice cracked, almost a whisper. "I'm scared." "Me too," Elias said. "But scared men still ride, And scared girls still fight. They stared at each other for a long moment. Then Ayanna nodded. Down the hill, Ezra watched the cabin through a spyglass. A smile crawled across his lips. "Won't be long now," he muttered. But he didn't see what was already shifting. He didn't know that the man he thought would bend was about to rise. And the girl they thought they'd break, she was about to lead them straight to the truth. Elias had never fancied himself a strategist. He was a rancher, plain and weather-worn, used to fixing fences and calming wild horses, not outwitting hired guns. But by the time the sun had risen fully over the hills, casting golden streaks across the valley floor, he'd already made his choice. There was no running, not anymore. He tightened the saddle on his old gelding, Buck, eyes flicking toward the tree line where Ezra's men lay in wait. The wind shifted, carrying with it the scent of smoke, gunpowder, and something else, something mean and inevitable. Inside the barn, Ayanna stood by the window, watching him. Her bandaged shoulder ached, but she kept her posture tall, refusing to be seen as weak. "You sure about this?" she asked. Elias nodded. "They're waiting for me to hide, to give you up. I'm gonna do the one damn thing they ain't expectin'." Ayanna frowned. "Which is?" "Walk straight into hell." He handed her the rifle.
"If I don't come back, you ride south at first light. Take the treaty with you. Get it into the right hands. Sheriff Rollins in Dry Creek, he was a bastard to me, but he hates corruption more than he hates Indians." She hesitated. "And if they catch me?" "You shoot." He turned to go, but her voice stopped him. "Elias." He looked back. "Thank you." He nodded once, then rode out. The path down from the ridge was narrow, framed by dead cottonwoods and shattered stone. As Elias rode through the dry creek bed, he could feel eyes on him, like buzzards circling something that hadn't died yet. It didn't take long for Ezra's men to emerge from the brush. 6 riders, guns drawn. One of them, a younger man with a twisted mustache and a Confederate jacket 2 sizes too big, raised his rifle. "That's far enough." Elias reined in. "I ain't here to fight," he called. "I'm here to talk." Laughter. The man in the gray coat spit a wad of tobacco. "Talk's cheap. You got the girl or not?" Elias didn't flinch. "She ain't what you say she is." Another rider growled, "She's a killer." "No," Elias said, "she's a witness." That earned silence. Then, from behind them, Ezra's voice cut through the canyon like a blade. "Well, well, if it ain't the Good Shepherd." Ezra stepped into view, dismounting with a slow, theatrical grace. He was dressed in black, boots polished, a pearl-handled pistol at his side. "Tell me, Elias, what makes a man like you throw his life away for a little savage with blood on her hands?" "She don't have blood on her hands," Elias said evenly, "but you do." Ezra's eyes narrowed. "Careful. You sent your boys to kill a witness, to destroy a treaty older than any one of us." The bounty hunter's smile vanished. "So that's what this is about," he muttered. "The goddamned medallion." Elias said nothing. "You don't know what you're playing with, Turner. That land's worth more than gold." "You think the people who paid me care about some Apache superstition?" Elias's voice was low. "I think they care about what happens if the truth gets out." Ezra stepped closer, boots crunching over gravel. "Give me the girl. Walk away. Live what's left of your life with both knees still working. Otherwise," he tapped his pistol, "I'll show you just how disposable good men are in this country." Elias didn't move. And then, slowly, he dismounted. He dropped his rifle in the dirt. Ezra blinked. "What the hell are you doing?" "I'll come with you," Elias said. "You let her go, I come quiet.
I won't fight. Hell, you can say I confessed to aiding a murderer. Get your bounty, ride off rich." Ezra looked him over, calculating. Then he laughed. "You really think I care about taking you in alive?" Elias said nothing. That was his answer. Suddenly, a rifle butt cracked across the back of his head. He went down hard. Ezra stepped forward and kicked his side. "Tie him up. We'll burn the ranch and flush her out like a rat." As the dust settled and Elias lay bleeding, unconscious and bound, a shadow moved in the hills above. And from the loft window of the barn, Ayanna saw everything. Her grip tightened on the rifle Elias had left behind. If they thought they'd broken him, they hadn't met her yet. Pain bloomed like fire behind Elias's eyes as he came to. His wrists were bound with coarse rope, tight enough to bite through skin, and his hat was gone, leaving the July sun to beat down unrelenting on his brow. Dirt filled his mouth. Blood stained the corner of his lips. They had dragged him to a dry patch of earth near the old cattle pens. His barn smoldered in the distance, embers curling upward like dying prayers. Ezra Crow crouched beside him, sharp boots planted firm, a glint of delight dancing in those cold predator eyes. "Well," Ezra said, "you didn't disappoint. Brave, stupid, predictable." Elias coughed hard, then spat blood into the dirt. "I figured if you were gonna kill me, you'd have done it already." Ezra chuckled. "Don't rush me, rancher. Some things are worth savoring." He rose, pacing slowly around Elias like a vulture circling meat. "You know what I can't figure?" Ezra asked. "What made a man like you throw everything away for a little thief branded a killer? Did she cry? Whisper something about redemption? Or did she just remind you of someone you lost?" Elias didn't answer. Ezra crouched again. "Ah, that's it, ain't it? You lost someone." Still silence. "You think you're saving her, but she ain't worth saving, Turner. None of 'em are. You think the cavalry gives a damn about one Apache girl and her piece of scrap metal? That medallion is a symbol, yeah, but the land it protects, that's worth killing for." Elias's jaw clenched. Ezra leaned closer. "There's gonna be a railroad coming through that valley within the year. That treaty of hers, it gives her people claim to the land from here to the Red Ridge. You think the government's gonna let that stand?" "That land was promised," Elias muttered. Ezra's smile faded. "Yeah, and promises break easy when there's silver in the hills. So you can either tell me where she's hiding, or I'll tear your ranch apart one floorboard at a time till I find her myself." From somewhere behind, one of Ezra's men approached. "Boss, the barn's clear, no sign of her." Ezra straightened. "Then she's watching." He turned slowly, voice raised like a stage actor. "You hear that, girl? Your hero's gonna die for you, just like your family did, just like your people will." He looked back at Elias. "Last chance. Where is she?" Elias looked up, blood in his teeth. "Go to hell." Ezra's smile vanished. He drew his pistol. "I was born there," he said, raising it. The world narrowed to a gleam of sun on polished steel. Elias stared down the barrel, ready. Then, crack! The first shot wasn't Ezra's. A bullet tore into the dirt by Ezra's boots. The outlaw stumbled back, startled. Another shot rang out, this one closer, sharper, from high ground. A third. One of the men by the cattle fence cried out, clutching his shoulder and collapsing. "Sniper!" someone shouted. Chaos erupted. Ezra dove for cover behind an overturned trough. His men scrambled, returning wild, desperate fire toward the distant ridge. But there was no sniper, only a girl,
Ayanna. She moved through the trees like a ghost, fast and deliberate, rifle in hand, face set in stone. She'd circled wide in the canyon and taken position on a ledge above the ranch. It was risky, but it worked. Her first shots weren't meant to kill, they were meant to scatter, and they had. In the confusion, Rex burst from behind a haystack where he'd been hiding since the night before. With a snarl, he lunged at the nearest gunman, clamping his jaws on the man's rest and knocking him flat. Elias, still bound, rolled toward the dropped knife on the ground. Ezra's shout cut through the noise, "Get the girl! Don't kill her!" But it was too late. Ayanna dropped into a crouch, fired again, then slid down the rocky incline as if born to it. She moved with the focus of someone who had no intention of running again. Elias grunted, pulling the knife toward his hands, sawing through rope with everything he had. And in that moment, through the rising smoke and shattered silence, something shifted. This was no longer a rescue, it was a rebellion. Elias burst free of the last rope just as a bullet whined overhead, slicing through the dry summer air. His wrists bled, but he didn't care. He grabbed the fallen rifle near the trough and rolled behind a stack of firewood. His breath came ragged, but his eyes were steady now, sharp, alive. Ayanna was halfway down the slope, moving fast through sagebrush and rock. She darted behind a broken wagon, pausing only long enough to chamber another round. Her eyes met Elias's through the smoke, and in that brief glance a wordless plan passed between them. Elias called out to Rex. The dog growled low in response, crouching behind a barrel with ears pinned flat. One of Ezra's men crept too close, and Rex lunged again, this time locking his jaws on the man's boot and dragging him to the dirt with terrifying force. Elias took the shot. One clean crack of his rifle, and the outlaw dropped without a sound. That was the beginning. From that moment, the tide shifted. Elias moved like a man reborn, ducking between cover, firing short, controlled bursts. He wasn't reckless. He was efficient, methodical, the way a man fights not for glory, but because he has nothing left to lose and someone else to protect. Ayanna advanced from the side, picking off anyone who flanked the barn. She moved with a grace born of survival, her breathing measured, her hands steady. This wasn't the first time she'd been hunted, but maybe it would be the last. Ezra, now pinned behind a water trough with only 2 men left, roared over the chaos. "She's just a damn girl! Push forward!" But they didn't. His men hesitated. They had expected a wounded girl and a tired rancher, not a war. Smoke thickened around the house. Ayanna tossed Elias a second rifle, his old Winchester, and he caught it mid-air like a piece of himself had returned. He checked the chamber, cocked it, and fired. One shot, dead center mass. Another man down. Then the silence between shots widened. Only the wind moved through the broken corral now, rattling the charred boards and whispering through the dust. Ayanna stepped into the open, chest rising and falling. Her rifle hung loose by her side. She looked at Ezra like she'd seen a ghost and realized she no longer feared it. Elias emerged beside her, hat back on his head, blood at his temple. He raised his rifle, not to shoot, but to point. "Drop it, Ezra," he said. "It's over." Ezra stared at them both, Elias bleeding but unbroken, Ayanna blazing with fury and calm, and the medallion at her throat catching the late sun. He spat in the dirt. "You really think you changed anything?" he growled. "That piece of silver won't stop a damn train." Ayanna stepped forward. "It won't need to. But the people who sent you, they'll have to crawl over your corpse to get it." Ezra laughed once, bitter and low, then reached for his gun. 2 shots rang out. Elias and Ayanna fired at the same time. Ezra stumbled back, hit clean in the shoulder and thigh. He collapsed hard, weapon clattering from his hand. Rex stood over him, growling low.
Ayanna approached and knelt, lifting the medallion from beneath her shirt and holding it in front of his face. "You know what this is," she said, "but you never understood it." Ezra, gasping, sneered. "Some Apache trinket?" Ayanna shook her head. "This is proof," she said, "that your people made a promise, and mine never forgot." Behind her, Elias lowered his rifle. The fight was over. Not just the gunfight, the real one. The one about dignity and memory and standing for something when the world tells you to forget. Smoke still curled from the barn, but the sun was rising now over the ridge. And for the first time in years, Elias felt the light not just on his skin, but inside. The land was still scarred, but it had not been taken. Not yet. Ezra Crow lay groaning in the dirt, blood soaking through the sleeve of his canvas coat. His pistol sat just out of reach, half buried in dust, as Rex stood over it, teeth bared, daring him to try again. Ayanna kept her rifle lowered, but not forgotten. Her voice, when she spoke, was low and steady. "Tell me who sent you," she said. Ezra coughed, spit blood into the dirt, and smiled a grim red smile. "You think this ends with me? I'm just the first shadow. There are others. Men with money. Men with maps." Elias stepped forward, the rifle still slung at his side, but his hand rested on the stock like a warning. "You came here for that medallion, but you didn't know what it really was, did you?" Ezra tried to speak, but Elias cut him off. "It's not about gold or treasure. It's about a promise, a document older than this town, signed by men in Washington and broken by men like you." Ayanna reached into her satchel and carefully pulled out a small leather pouch, still damp with blood. Inside was a folded piece of parchment, sealed with red wax and symbols etched in both Apache and English. She held it up in the morning light. "This," she said, "is what you were willing to kill for." Elias took a step closer, reading the aged script over her shoulder. It was a treaty, dated decades ago, a formal agreement recognizing sacred land to the Apache people, a land now claimed by the railroad, by miners, by men like Ezra and whoever paid him. "They buried it," Ayanna said, "with the bones of the ones who died protecting it, and they thought that was the end of it." Ezra's face twisted, half in pain, half in something darker. "You think anyone cares about that scrap of paper?" Ayanna didn't flinch. "I care. My people care. And now he does too." She nodded at Elias. The rancher said nothing, just looked out across the horizon, toward the tracks in the distance, toward the soldiers and land grabbers who might one day follow Ezra. But not today. Today they had won something rare in the West. Time, truth, a breath of justice. He turned back to Ezra, and his voice was calm. "You're going to ride into Dustwater Crossing. You're going to hand that document to the marshal. And you're going to tell him exactly what you told us, who sent you and why." Ezra sneered. "And if I don't?" Elias nodded toward Rex. "Then he gets to decide." The dog growled low, as if he understood every word. Ezra winced, his bravado cracking. "Fine," he muttered. "But it won't matter. They'll send more." "Then we'll be waiting," Elias said. They bound Ezra's wounds with rough cloth and secured his arms. The sun was full now, casting long shadows behind them. Shadows of a barn burned down, a corral half ruined, and a house that still stood, barely. But the people standing beside it were changed. Elias looked at Ayanna, truly looked at her now. She wasn't a fugitive. She wasn't a girl running from ghosts. She was someone who had carried the truth when no one else dared. "You saved this land," he said. She shook her head. "You gave it a place to stand." They loaded Ezra onto a spare horse. As he rode ahead, Elias and Ayanna followed. The treaty rolled and tied tight inside a saddlebag. The prairie stretched ahead, broken and wild and unforgiving, but no longer silent. Behind them, smoke drifted from the ruins. But the wind was changing. Not fast, not loud, but enough to carry the truth a little farther. The ride back to Dustwater Crossing was slow and solemn. Ezra slumped in the saddle, wrists bound, his pride as bruised as his body. Elias rode beside him, silent but watchful. Ayanna followed close behind, the leather pouch containing the treaty secure beneath her arm, its weight heavier than any weapon. The town hadn't changed much. Dust still choked the streets, and the saloon's piano still played off-key behind slatted windows. But as the trio rode in, heads turned. Men stepped off porches. Women pulled children inside. The sight of a bound man, a feared bounty hunter, arriving beside a rancher and a young Apache girl sparked whispers like wildfire. Marshal Crane met them outside his office, hand resting casually on his holster. Elias dismounted and jerked his chin toward Ezra. "He's got something to tell you." Crane's eyes narrowed. "That's so?" Ezra sneered but said nothing. Ayanna stepped forward. "There's a treaty, signed and buried. He tried to destroy it, kill me for it." She handed the leather pouch to Crane. He untied the flap, slowly pulling out the brittle document. His jaw tightened as he read. Then again. Then once more, as if each word carved something into his conscience. "This is real," he said. "It was signed by men in uniform," Elias added, "men whose names still hang in this courthouse." Ezra finally found his voice. "It's worthless now. Paper doesn't stop bullets. You think Washington cares about some deal with savages?" Crane looked up, his face a shade harder. "I think I care," he said. He turned to his deputy. "Get this man in a cell, no bail. I want a wire sent to the territorial judge by sundown." Ezra cursed as he was dragged inside. For a long moment, Elias stood in the middle of the street, eyes closed, letting the sounds of Dustwater wash over him. This place at once only reminded him of loss, the courthouse where his land dispute failed, the saloon where he gambled away the last memory of his wife. But now, it felt different. Ayanna stood beside him, arms crossed, chin lifted. She didn't flinch at the stares, didn't hide her face. She was no longer running. A boy from the telegraph office stepped outside, stared at her, then nodded. Not everyone would change overnight, but someone just had. And maybe that was enough for now. They stayed at the ranch for another 2 weeks. The barn was half burned, the corral needed rebuilding. Fences had been torn down, and a bitter black ring still marked the grass where the fire had burned. But Elias didn't complain. He just worked, sunrise to sunset, and Ayanna worked beside him. She knew how to braid rope better than he did. She patched saddlebags with precise stitches learned from her grandmother. And though her shoulder was still healing, she insisted on helping with the horses, murmuring words in Apache that soothed even the skittish ones. They rarely spoke about what had happened. There was no need. Some things settled deeper in silence. One morning, Elias found her out by the grave markers, the old ones, the spot where he'd buried Martha and the boy. Ayanna stood there quietly, her fingers brushing the wooden cross. "I didn't mean to find this," she said. Elias nodded. "It's all right. They'd like the company." "I had a sister," Ayanna said. "She died last winter, fever. I wasn't there when it happened. I was out hunting. I came back too late." Elias didn't offer pity, just stood beside her in the wind, letting the moment breathe. "I
Thought I'd never feel close to anyone again," she added, almost a whisper. "Not like that, not family." Elias looked out over the field. The fence line stretched into the distance, still broken in places. "You fix what you can," he said, "and you learn to carry what you can't." Later that evening, they sat by the fire, Rex curled between them. Ayanna pulled something from her bag, the medallion. Not the treaty this time, but a carved piece of bone, worn smooth with age. "This belonged to my grandfather," she said. "He said if I ever found someone I could trust, I should give this to them." She held it out. Elias didn't move at first. Then, slowly, he reached forward and took it. His hands were weathered, but they held it with care. He didn't say thank you. Didn't need to. The fire crackled. Above them, stars blinked through a wide western sky. The kind of night that made even a broken man believe in second chances. And maybe, just maybe, they weren't alone anymore. Some stories don't end with a bang. Some just settle, like dust after a storm, leaving behind a silence that feels like peace. When Ayanna finally left, there was no tearful goodbye, just a quiet saddle up at dawn. She had a duty now, to return the treaty, to speak the truth among her people, to carry forward the legacy that others had tried to bury. Elias didn't stop her. He packed her canteen, gave her half the jerky he had left, and handed over a small, weathered map of the northern trails. "Ride before noon," he said. "The sun will be at your back." Ayanna nodded. "And you?" "I'll be here." She smiled, small and real. Then she was gone, vanishing into the horizon like all good stories do, without fanfare, without finality, just onward. Days passed, weeks. Elias rebuilt the barn, replanted the field, fixed the gate Martha used to hate because it always creaked. And one morning he hung the bone medallion above the fireplace, not as a trophy, not as a decoration, but as a reminder that someone trusted him again, that he chose to protect, not destroy, that silence doesn't mean surrender, and that justice can begin with just one man, one moment, and a single decision to do what's right. Maybe that's what this story was always about. Not revenge, not redemption, but recognition of pain, of humanity, of each other. Because the West wasn't just carved by bullets and blood. It was shaped by choices. Quiet, stubborn, courageous choices, made by those no one will remember, but should. And if this one meant something to you, leave a comment below, because stories like this don't survive unless we share them, unless we remember them, and unless we carry them forward, one soul at a time. Hit subscribe, because more true Wild West stories are coming, and every one begins the same way, with a stranger, a choice, and a moment that changes everything.